The reason that industry networks come to us for accredited solutions is they want to see those elements of critical fluency effectively developed within these programs. How do we combine application of learning, so individuals on these programs taking their assessments back into their companies, their organizations?
Hello and welcome to the Strategic Partnerships podcast series. My name is Balzhano Razbaeva, Manager Strategic Initiatives at UIN, and I'm your host for today. Today we're diving into the transformative power of university-industry collaboration with Claire McBride, Convene Project Lead and Head of Enterprise Academy at Technological University Dublin. Claire shares insights on the 13-year partnership between TUDublin and Digital Skillnet, highlighting how their co-created and accredited programs bridge theoretical knowledge and practical application. Tune in as we explore the processes behind developing these programs, the impact on learners and employers, and future trends in collaborative education. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, and especially Claire McBride, who is joining us all the way from Dublin, as we will be diving deep into the dynamic landscape of university-industry collaboration. And today specifically, we're looking into the partnership between Technological University Dublin and Digital Skillnet, hoping to get many insights into the power of collaborative education initiatives. This is an exceptional example of collaboration between university and an industry partner, because we'll be getting an opportunity to explore how the collaborative educational programs have been developing in this particular case over the past, I believe, 13 years. So hopefully, together with Claire, we will be able to get a very comprehensive understanding of the impact of such partnerships, especially when it comes to talent development and workforce readiness. Claire McBride is a Convene Project Lead and Head of Enterprise Academy at Technological University Dublin. So thank you so much, Claire, for joining us today. And I very much look forward to diving deep into this topic together with you.
That's my pleasure. Well done.
I have a number of questions, of course, that I have prepared, as I find this partnership case very, very interesting, because I think it's always a bit tricky when it comes to getting those programs accredited as well and making sure that the impact is visible. So very much curious to hear from you. And maybe we can start with your role at Technological University Dublin and the goals of Enterprise Academy. And perhaps you can also tell us a little bit more about the partner, Digital Skillnet, and its mission.
Delighted to do that. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, Balzan. So I'm, as you've mentioned, head of the Enterprise Academy and Convene Project Lead here in TU Dublin. And essentially, we are a multidisciplinary business unit within the university charged with developing essentially solutions, accredited talent development solutions for our enterprise partners. Important to mention that we are part of Technological University Dublin, which is represented across 5 faculties and 25 schools. Increasingly, we are seeing a role for multidisciplinary solutions. Historically, we might have had single discipline programs that could be dealt with on a faculty by faculty or even school by school basis. But increasingly, we're seeing that cross-disciplinary element to programs, whether multidisciplinary in and of themselves or whether they are looking at a single discipline. Just to speak about, I suppose, our funding briefly. So we're funded under the Human Capital Initiative, which is administered by our Higher Education Authority on behalf of the government. That's a 5-year programme, and it's focused on really enabling higher education institutions to deliver skills-focused programs and principally targeting priority and emerging skills needs. That brings me on to Technology Ireland Digital Skillnet, so clearly representative of 250 member companies who are effectively seeking to remain at the frontier of their sector and certainly competitiveness within their sectors by engaging with the offerings of Digital Skillnet. They may be training programs, they may be curated digital solutions, and our primary interaction is indeed in the area of collaborative programs, accredited programs.
Thank you so much. So how did this partnership come about? And maybe you can also tell us a little bit what were the key motivations, I guess, of each particular partner when it comes to establishing such impressive initiative.
Sure. As you mentioned at the outset, there's a 13-year history to this particular relationship. And I suppose I would hark back to my time in faculty. So I've been in the Enterprise Academy for about a year and a half now. But before that, I was in the business faculty and responded effectively to a competitive tender. Technological University Dublin and its heritage institutions have a long-established practice of working with enterprise, and I had just completed a programme which I think went on for probably 18 years with Enterprise Ireland on export sales development, and gone back into faculty full-time, but noticed the tender for a programme, a postgraduate diploma in product management. Oftentimes there's a passion-driven element to what we do in universities, and this was one of mine. As a fresh graduate going into the workforce, I secured my first graduate role as a product manager and felt very unprepared for the task. So when I saw a requirement for an accredited collaborative program in product management, I was very enthusiastic to respond, and we built a team within the faculty to do that. The requirement for accreditation came from the industry steering group, which is particularly interesting. And I know we have that question from time to time around the application to practice in combination with theoretical rigor. But this was something that was very much at the forefront of the steering group's mind, that they wanted that for the product management profession in Ireland, and effectively to build that profession, to build a community of practice within that. So we worked very closely post-tender award with Digital Skillnet, and from winning the tender to launching the programme was a period of 3 months. Again, that's within a single discipline. It was fast at the time. We've since our most recent tender, we won it and took 9 months to get from tender to launch. But just some examples there of the types of engagement, and also important to say that after the launch of the postgraduate diploma, the industry group came back and said, can you build on a master's option? So based on the feedback that they'd had from the learners, what's next?
What an impressive speed as well. I mean, usually when we talk about collaboration, we often hear from both parties that sometimes it takes just ages to get something started. So congratulations on that. And it seems like both parties had very particular missions and visions behind it, and also the idea of how it would look like. But I'm also wondering, how does the university side particularly manage to address those, I can imagine, also evolving needs of the businesses? Because in that particular case, it sounded like you were co-creating the profession. So I wonder how the evolution then progressed as the industry has been changing with the time.
Yeah, so I think a few approaches there that we would deploy. One is, on an ongoing basis, the program content and the curriculum probably changed by 20% year on year. And now that fits within the rigor of learning outcomes, but most certainly that content is updated. We do that in a number of ways. One is, for a lot of our industry programs, we combine our core faculty, so our in-house faculty, primarily research active, with adjunct faculty and what we call our enterprise faculty. So that enables us to combine the regular faculty members and their facilitation with worldwide experts in the particular field. So if we take product management, a lot of the knowledge and in fact the origins of product management are in North America. So we drew on enterprise faculty from there and adjunct members who are widely authored in the field and consult in the field on a regular basis. So that allows us combined to make sure that we keep up to date. The other really important thing here is that in these types of programs, peer learning is key. So one of the qualifications for entry to the program is that the candidate is in a product management role or an adjacent function. So that means effectively that you have a cohort of 30 people coming into the conversation on a regular basis with their day-to-day, month-to-month challenges in terms of strategic alignment, in terms of things like implementing agile, discovery, etc. So that combination almost represents an ecosystem that drives the learning and the curriculum forward and pretty much arrives at that 20% change year on year.
So yeah, I think it's also very important indeed to capitalize on that knowledge in the room, so to say, to provide both theory and practice, but then also I think peer learning is certainly a very important element.
Maybe to illustrate an extension of that, and it just so happens there was an event last week. So in conjunction with that program, Technological University Dublin sponsors or co-sponsors Product Camp Dublin with the Digital Skillnet. And last week we had 200 product managers on campus in Dublin at an unconference. So they're effectively peer learning and peer sharing their emergent practices, again, whether in discovery, agile, networking, AI, etc. That it's almost looking at an augmented learning platform, if you like, that extends out that peer-to-peer learning, whereby we have the cohorts effectively building their own conference.
That is wonderful to hear the contribution that those learners can make, not only to the success of the programs themselves, but also to the learning success of each other. Maybe talking about the curriculum design, can we perhaps step out the process of that development, especially when it comes to not only hearing the needs of industry that you already talked about, but also how can we make sure, and what is maybe some of the mechanisms that you apply when it comes to also keeping this academic rigor that you talked about as well. So what are some of the steps that you usually will go through when you start building a program in collaboration with the industry partner?
So we deploy effectively a multi-stage process that looks pretty much like a design thinking process that begins with discovery, developing the typical personas. But as you say, you would probably assume that given the collaborative context. I suppose a few really important points. Steve Jobs' recommendation is never to allow your client to build a solution. And we're very much believers in that. So it's really a negotiated position once we've done the discovery work and effectively built those personas, and also really designed and thought about the go-to-market strategy, because we want these programs to be repeatable. We want them to be scalable. But in terms of the theoretical rigor, then that's the job of faculty to ensure that. So a typical approach on a postgraduate diploma would be to have probably around 60% of what we would call applied learning and 40% theory. So the reason that industry networks like Digital Skillnet come to us for accredited solutions is they want to see those elements of critical fluency effectively developed within these programs. They also want to see authentic assessment. So effectively looking at how do we combine application of learning, so individuals on these programs taking their assessments back into their companies, their organizations, but effectively marrying the application to practice with that development of the understanding of theory. Call it Bloom's taxonomy, looking at various pedagogies, methodologies, but essentially that's what we look to. And then at the master's track level, we switch that to 60% theory and 40% application to practice. But that would be very much a design philosophy that we bring to the table that works very well for Digital Skillnet, among other partners.
Very interesting. Is there any on-job training that is also involved in some of those programs? I just wonder also, because we talked about this combination of theory and practice, how much practice do we talk about? Is it really that the learners then will have to go and just basically get this on-job experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. To clarify that, Digital Skillnet funds learners in enterprise. So we're talking about workplace learners, and we're specifically in this particular case study looking at workplace learners involved in the product management function or adjacent functions. So actually, in point of fact, it would be quite difficult for a learner to engage in the program and not be in enterprise and not be within the function, because the assessments, the authentic assessments, are very carefully crafted and tailored in order to facilitate application. Now, when our learners come on board, they tend to be very taken with the application to practice piece and a little bit slower to embrace with enthusiasm the theoretical element. But actually, as they work their way through the program, they learn and appreciate that it's the two working in tandem that really does accelerate their learning and their ability to affect actually competitiveness innovation, entrepreneurial thinking in the workplace, because we're not just giving them tools and frameworks, we're also giving them the basis and the rationale for why their colleagues should embrace those as well. So on many occasions, we encourage our learners to run brown bag sessions over lunch, which socialize some of what they're learning on the program and effectively help to implement that.
Thank you so much for this elaboration. I think this is kind of like a $1 million question for many of the universities that are tuning in today. And I also know that it can be quite challenging to get those programs accredited. So maybe you can also help us understand a little bit what was your experience with that.
Yeah, really good question. And you are probably hitting on a nerve for a lot of us there. Speaking of the origins of our relationship with Digital Skillnet, from 13 years ago, we were a single entity, then Dublin Institute of Technology. We now have 3 heritage institutions combining to make the Technological University Dublin. That represents 28,000 students, about a third of whom are part-time learners, so a very significant body of part-time learning. With a larger entity comes more complexity by definition. There are lots of advantages, but certainly there's greater complexity. So from winning a tender to validation has probably doubled, if not tripled in time. And I think, quite frankly, it's something that we've got to work on across our higher education institutions to understand how we can speed that process up. So I spoke about our latest addition to the joint portfolio, if you like, or the partnership portfolio, which is our postgraduate diploma in sports analytics, technology and innovation. That went from a single discipline program with product management to the sports tech program, which is across 4 of our faculties. By definition, that's going to take more time. And like I said, it took effectively 9 months vis-a-vis the 3 that we would have done with a single discipline. I think in terms of the rigor of the validation process, that's part of what the partnership requires. And partners do understand that it takes time. I don't have the silver bullet solution to speeding it up further, but I think that the thoroughness and the depth and degree of collaboration between ourselves as a university and our industry partners can support that. And we encourage our industry partners to be present at the validation event in terms of how that concludes.
Speaking of measuring the success of such initiative, accreditation is, of course, one thing, then measuring the learning outcomes. So what are the things that you would usually try to measure when it comes to success and impact of those initiatives? And I think in your particular case, it is now possible to maybe even look back into the decade of the development. So what is it that you would usually, bring forward when it comes to telling the success story of such collaboration?
Yeah, so there are a number of avenues there, Balzan. So a primary one for me is a derivation of the Net Promoter Score. And effectively, that looks at for each cohort, at least 60% of each cohort is recruited by previous cohorts. That begs the question, what do you do for the first one? And that takes a significant amount of investment. What we're trying to do here, and in particular, just bringing on board the Skillnet organization more broadly, also Digital Skillnet as one of the 70 networks there, is they fund and get involved in developments that add to the body of knowledge effectively available. So we're talking about exploring new ground, and that's risk prone, as we all know. So the first year requires a significant effort in terms of building that go-to-market strategy. Thereafter, as I say, 6 and 10 referred is one measure of success. We have a number of other measures. We engage quite frequently with our alumni base on that particular program. That's now close to 400 graduates. But one of the things that we do on a consistent basis is to go back and do case studies. So really looking qualitatively at what the benefits of the program were. And we involve 3 parties to that. 1, the learner, who's very central. 2, the employer, also very central in this context, given that all of the participants are in employment and funded as such. And 3, then the faculty member or the program chair. So really that kind of circular approach, looking at graduates who may be in large-scale enterprises, who've innovated the business model as a result of their engagement, or potentially smaller scale enterprises and startups who've effectively potentially pivoted or iterated their original ideas based on their learning from the program.
Was this approach be attempted, at least to be replicated across, I guess, other disciplines or other areas of work at TU Dublin or maybe some other Irish universities? I'm just curious how easy it is to replicate or to at least follow some of the common steps when it comes to such collaboration.
I think we'll be very open to partnering with our fellow universities and educators in terms of an approach to measuring impact, which is quite difficult to do because there are so many variables within that, not least the learner context in terms of the results that are achieved, the original intent. I think what we've been doing, certainly at the Enterprise Academy, is focusing very much on that case study approach. So we're looking at individual organizations, individual learners, and I think we've developed probably at least 7 or 8 case studies in the last 6 months. And it's really looking at how we articulate the value of programs to the individual, to the enterprise, and really telling ourselves the story of the full end-to-end life cycle of the learner journey and whether or not indeed we are achieving the learning outcomes that we set out to, and indeed the program learning outcomes in that kind of fulsome context. I think there are many other impact measures. I mentioned derivations of Net Promoter Score, but fundamentally for me, what we're looking to build is learning ambassadors, I think. So the experience, and when people engage with third level institutions or otherwise, we can argue that they're engaging with the product, but it's really an end-to-end experience from the information session at the outset to how we communicate, to the onboarding, to the experience of learning throughout, to our enablement of peer learning, networking, and then graduation and beyond. As I've mentioned, we have a full, I suppose, menu life cycle, including what I mentioned, which is sponsorship of the Product Camp Dublin event last week, specifically talking about the core program that we're referencing today. But I think that there's a significant opportunity there for us to work with our fellow higher education institutions on different approaches, taking best practice, looking at next practice, and we'd be very open to sharing in that and indeed learning from our counterparts.
Thank you, Claire. And we have a few minutes left, so I think maybe we can talk a little bit about the future. So sure. I'm very keen to hear what's your take on, future trends as we like to talk about them, and what kind of future trends do you see, particularly in this university industry collaboration space, especially when it comes to education-driven initiatives? Do you see an effect by all of those new emerging technologies, or do you also see how the learners may be changing their behavior? Anything that you can share with us would be certainly very valuable.
I think all of that applies, Balzan. So specifically, we are engaged in a lot of conversations now around AI and its impact. That will be no surprise to anybody. I think our focus continues, and indeed the focus of enterprise continues to be on business value. What's the problem we're solving? What's the opportunity we're leveraging? Let's start there and then look at enabling technologies and enabling mechanisms to accelerate the performance of individuals and companies through our learning provision. So when we talk about technologies, and I don't think this is new, but we have a project within the Enterprise Academy called Curate and Assess, which is really around the flipped classroom. And I think the whole area of curated learning, personalized learning, that menu of synchronous, asynchronous, face-to-face, remote, I want to be careful here not to disrespect any discipline. How many ways can we teach certain aspects of development or project management or communication skills, etc.? So is there a way that we can furnish the learning in a way that meets the individual learner preferences and needs by leveraging and curating an array of resources across those modes that I mentioned earlier? And I think the answer has to be yes. So at the moment, we're engaged, and I suppose it's important to say that we're now developing a corporate solution for an enterprise partner in the area of product management, and looking at how that initial collaboration has allowed us to expand effectively our portfolio and meet those all-important organizational needs that we're effectively funded to deliver on. But there we are building a curated suite of, or curated platform, if you like, for our company partner that will draw on synchronous, asynchronous, pre-recorded sessions on the part of faculty, but also third-party platforms. And I probably don't need to cite them here, but many of them we will know, many of them we've engaged with and contracted with. So it's about leveraging all of those aspects in order that we can deliver something akin to a personalized, curated learning solution, but one that is scalable and repeatable. And I think that's important in terms of affordability and value for money.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for sharing not only insights on this in particular, but also sharing your story of collaboration. That brings us to the end. So Claire, thank you so much for joining today and for telling us the story of such an impressive partnership. I'm sure everyone was able to learn a lot from it. And I would also invite everyone to check out the TUDublin website if you would like to learn more about those programs. And yeah, just to remind everyone as well, this event is part of our free fireside chat series, and we have many more things to come up. So please just make sure to visit our website, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Delighted to be here today. Thank you very much, Balzan.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.